Hello, Kevin McAleer. Welcome to the Junot Files.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate your invite.
Now, your new book is called Errol Flynn, an epic story, epic
Epic,
life,
epic life,
epic
right?
life. Yes, I know. And now you have taken Errol Flynn's life story and you have put it to a prose. You made an epic poem out of it, and you used a Don Juan stanza from Lord Byron, and I was just wondering what made you come upon doing the story like that?
Well, that's the right question to ask because it's very unusual, the approach. I, like you, had always been interested in Errol Flynn, just as sort of an avocation almost, reading all the books about him and seeing as many films as was possible to see back in the day when you didn't have video and DVDs and whatnot. And I, like you, read My Wicked, Wicked Ways, which is his great autobiography, partially ghostwritten, but mainly his own words. So we can credit it to him. And that's what really turned me on to him, was his writing. He also wrote a couple of novels, wrote lots of articles for Hollywood publications. And to get to the answer to your question, I had always wanted to write a biography. I've written, several things, novels, history, book of short stories, things like that. But I always wanted to write a biography because that's my favorite form of literature, actually. I love biographies. And I thought, okay, it's time to write a biography. It's about 10, 12 years ago. And who do I want to write one on? Who can I write one on? And I decided, well, Flynn. I've always been interested in Flynn. And not that he hasn't been done right by other biographers. There's some great biographies of him out there, not least his own book, My Wicked Ways, as mentioned. But I thought, how do I do it? Because I don't want to go out into the archives. I don't want to go interviewing 800 stars. That's going to take up like 5 or 6 years of my life. I don't have the money or the wherewithal or the desire. So I thought I got to take another approach to it. And I've always loved poetry, and Byron is one of my favorite poets, excuse me. And Don Juan is one of my favorite poems of Byron. And I thought, okay, Flynn was the great Don Juan of his era. He even played the role in a film, 1948, Warner Brother picture, Adventures of Don Juan. Why don't I take the Byron Don Juan stanza, which is an ottava rima stanza. It's an A, B, A, B, A, B, C, C stanza form in terms of the rhyme. And I'll play around with it and see what I get. Well, playing around with it and seeing what I get, 12 years later, I had a book. Initially, I hadn't planned it that way. I just wanted to maybe fool around with it, write a couple cantos, as Byron called his various chapters, and I have hence called them in my own book. And one thing led to the next. And so I just combined 3 of my great loves, as it were, biography, Errol Flynn, and Byron, and put them together, and here we are.
I was going to ask you that, because now you did have Earl Conrad, who was Flynn's I want to say part-time ghostwriter for My Wicked, Wicked Ways. You shared this with him, and let me ask you, what was his response to that?
I'm not sure if I read you, Jim. Earl Conrad, I didn't share it with him.
Oh.
I must have shared it with someone. You're probably alluding to. I can't imagine. No, Errol Conrad died many years back. I mean, I think his work on My Wicked, Wicked Ways is fantastic. And now that you mentioned him, it's not actually inopportune that you mention him, because I think he wrote one of the great biographies of Flynn, or it's called a memoir, Errol Flynn, a memoir by Earl Conrad, not Errol, E-A-R-L, Conrad. It's fantastic. It's about that 6 or so months that Conrad spent writing My Wicked, Wicked Ways with Errol Flynn in Jamaica. And it's fantastic reading. It gives you a real insight into the Errol Flynn. And so in a way, I didn't speak with Errol personally because he was long gone when I became interested in this project. But he was a great source for me in writing this work of my own. Errol Flynn, a memoir by Earl Conrad.
That's what I'm thinking. Is that you consulted his work
constantly. That's what you're driving at. Yeah, constantly. Mm-hmm. And my own work is voluminously footnoted, as you will have yourself seen. I mean, there's some 200 and, I don't know, 40, 50, well, end notes rather. It's at the end of the reading material. And yeah, Conrad is end noted left, right, and center.
You also talk. As is at the very beginning. Carrie Harrison, forgive me, who is Rex Harrison's son.
Right.
Now, was there any trepidation on your part when you approached him and said, "Hey"?
Yes, there was, because he's a great literary man himself, and I met him here in Berlin. He was at this institute called the Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin. It's an advanced a center for advanced learning, and I do translation work for them. I'm not affiliated with them in any capacity as a fellow, but Kerry was several years back, and I don't know, he seemed like a nice guy. We got along, and I said, "Hey, Kerry, what do you think of this?" And we did a reading together, and he seemed to like the book, the Flynn book, and he wrote the foreword to it, and I'm very grateful to him. But I did have a great deal of trepidation, yes, because he's a great writer himself, the son of Professor Henry Higgins. You better get your English diction right, not to mention your prosody.
Now, you mentioned earlier you didn't go to like 800 former or stars who knew Errol Flynn. Did you consult any celebrities at all?
No, I didn't. There might have been a chance or two to do that. I could have picked up the phone and called maybe this, that, or the other person. I do have certain connections through the Flynn community, as it were, where I might have been able to do that. But I thought, what's the point? I'm going to get an interview here or there. They're old at this point. They're going to be repeating themselves or gilding the lily, God knows what. And everything's there out in the literature. The research has basically been done. So it was just my task to, reshape it and, give the reader who has read everything on Errol Flynn something new that they might give them a different slant on Errol Flynn in whatever way. But no, I'm a trained historian, actually, and I didn't want to go back into the archives and pick up and go chasing people down for interviews. That's murder. And it's not my style. Anyway, and the other thing is, the last thing is, this is largely a work of the imagination. I mean, you have seen it. I mean, I don't make anything up. Everything is right, I hew very closely to fact, and I insist on it. It's not just some sort of, burden I carry around with myself, thinking, oh my goodness, I have to, put it this way. But I love it. Flint himself probably gilded the lily in many respects. So once removed, I'm gilding. If I just take him at face value, which I don't always, I'm very critical of him and as a source. But I do reimagine certain instances in his life. I give them a certain interpretation that might be new for Flynn scholars. And most of all, and I note this in the endnotes, when I do so in the poem, I will not invent dialogue out of whole cloth, but from what I know of Flynn and his interlocutor in a certain situation, then yes, like authors of historical novels might do, they sticking as closely as they can to what they know to be true about a person in a certain historical situation, they will then put words in their mouth. Yes. So in these ways, it's definitely a work of the imagination, and as it should be. It's a poem. And so not everyone should come to this and think, my goodness, where are the facts? Where's Sergeant Friday with just the facts, ma'am? I don't just give facts. I give them a little bit of a ride, but nothing invented out of whole cloth.
Now, I know how hard writing is, but I've always considered poetry to be a harder form of writing, maybe the hardest form of writing. So, I gotta ask you, how hard was it for you to keep within the stanza um, format?
Well, I'm not a poet, as people who read this might immediately think. But I don't pretend to be. This is sort of blithe verse, I'm not trying to do Keats here. I'm not even trying to do Byron, who was much looser around the edges in terms of his rhyme schemes and all the rest. It was tough because the ottava rima stanza is not easy. I mean, you got to do A, B, A, B, A, B, and then the boom, C, C, the couplet. That's the fun part. You get to the end of it, and you're kind of going, whew, made it through those three, those three matching rhymes and the other three matching rhymes. I mean, you got to rhyme things 3 times without being banal about it. You can't just say love, glove, dove, 3 times. You got to come up with something new, and there's about 1,200 different stanzas. So it's an exacting form, but it was fun. At a certain point, I noticed I was writing my endnotes in iambic pentameter. I was thinking like that. Just write it, damn it. It's just an endnote. But you get into that way of thinking, so it's fun after a while. And I don't pretend to have triumphed over the form by any means. This is sort of a homage to Byron, whom I think more people should read. He's been forgotten even in the Academy. I mean, they sort of poo-poo him. It's Shelley and Wordsworth and Coleridge and maybe Keats and Blake, of course. But they always leave Byron out. And Byron was always my favorite romantic poet. So it's a homage to Byron. It's a homage to Flynn. And I hope I haven't embarrassed them too much up there looking down at me for my
or down there looking up
audacity in attempting to do poetry. But I think it's fun verse if you get into the spirit of it.
Or looking up, as the case may be, right?
Well, you never know about those two. That's right. So, yeah.
Now, Flynn's life, by his own admission, was, he didn't care if he embellished his own life. He says so in My Wicked, Wicked Ways. And there's some great stories in that book. A couple of them come to mind where he was attacked at a port, and he suffered a serious stab wound. The famous John Barrymore story. Do you have a favorite?
The John Barrymore story is completely made up. That is false.
Well, now Drew Barrymore wants to have that happen to her.
She did. Well, whatever.
That's what she just said yesterday.
Her, but...
Yeah.
Well, no, but I mean, because that story has been told about a good half dozen different stars. It's like it has gone the rounds in Hollywood. Like they did that with Bogey. They did it with so he comes to mind, and others. Come on. I mean, so in a way, it's one of my favorite because it's so implausible. It's like the gall of Flynn tried to pass that off on a gullible public. But seriously, I do like that story about the native. I think it's probably true though that he did get a wound in a skirmish with New Guinea natives, and he likely killed one too. I mean, because he writes a letter to his father where he talks about having killed a man, and in all likelihood that native that you allude to, or you didn't allude to that native, but I am now in that skirmish you allude to. That's an interesting one. I mean, here's a guy who was a murderer, a rapist. He wasn't a murderer, but he was a killer. It makes him more interesting. It doesn't make him necessarily more likable or admirable. But Favorite one, I don't know. I talk about it. I go with it in the book in Canto 2, where he has an affair with an older woman of a certain affluence, and he sort of plays the gigolo. This is in Australia, and at one point he decides, I got to get out of here and make my fortune out in the big world, get out from down under here, and he basically steals her jewels and makes off with them. We don't know if that's true or not. I wrote it up in the book as if it were true, but I write a very long endnote saying, where this may or may not have been true, but all the elements are there. All the elements are there for it to have been true. In fact, his great biographer for his time in New Guinea, a fellow named John Hammond Ward, he wrote a book called The Young Errol, fantastic work of research, where he went down to New Guinea. He went down to Australia, where Flynn spent his earlier years, and he tracked down all these stories. And he himself says in this book that this story of stealing the jewels from the society matron, it has all the elements to have been true. So whether it was true or not, we don't know. But that's a favorite one of mine. That's why I took the ball and ran with it in my own, my own version.
Now you've got other books coming out, or you're working on some new books, right?
I've got a couple of others that I'm working on, that haven't come out yet. You want to hear about it?
Yeah.
I was in academia for a while in the 90s, and I had sort of a very checkered career there. As I mentioned, I'm a trained historian. And I wrote up a novel, which is now out with agents and whatnot. We'll see if anyone bites. And it's about my time in academia in the 1990s. I have another one I'm just finishing up. It's about my boyhood in California. It's a novelized form about growing up in Los Angeles in the 60s and 70s. So those are the two things I'm working on right now.
Are they any poets? I mean, any poetry in those, or are you?
I've stopped. No. I've stopped doing that. I will use the Don Juan stanza to write little birthday cards to people and stuff. That's when I trot it out these days.
How far? What was the first movie you saw with Errol Flynn?
It's hard to know because, I think we're probably the same age. Roughly, I grew up in the 60s and 70s watching all kinds of stuff on TV, and with my pop, he just put the channel onto something, and I'd watch it. So I don't know. I could have seen something at age 2, 3, 4, 5, and I can't remember. What I can remember is that I can't remember that I first became really aware and interested in Errol Flynn after I read My Wicked, Wicked Ways in the early 80s. And then I read a biography or two added to that of him, and I became fascinated by him. And then I began watching his films consciously. I'm sure I saw Robin Hood. I'm sure I saw the Seahawk. I'm sure I saw Against All Flags. I'm sure I saw Captain Blood. I'm sure I saw the Charge of the Light Brigade before that. But I didn't consciously see them until I had interested myself for Errol Flynn, the man. So all those came like immediately thereafter. Then I oh, wow, Robin Hood, that's incredible. It's fantastic, But yeah, so I can't remember the first time I saw an Errol Flynn film. Because I'm sure I saw it without registering it.
Yeah. What's your favorite film?
My favorite film is No Holds Barred Gentleman Jim, where he plays the heavyweight boxing champion Jim Corbett. And I don't know if you've seen that one, Jim, but you ought to, Gentleman Jim. If you haven't, have you? Have you seen it?
Yes, he plays Jim Corbett, the boxer. Yeah,
it's fantastic. I mean, it's the closest film I think to his own personality. And he was very handy with his fists, Mr. Flynn. I mean, he gotten his share of brawls, and he was also kind of a trained boxer. He was in some amateur bouts in Australia where he grew up, so he knew a thing or two. He knew his way around the ring, and you see that he did most of his own stunts in that film. But that's not why I like it the most. It's just because it was such an effervescent and exuberant effort on his part, with great fast-paced direction by what's his name? Help me out! Oh my goodness! What's the guy? Oh, it's not Michael Curtiz, but the other guy.
John
this is
Ford.
terrible. some Flynn expert we have here. But
Hang
the
on,
name,
hang on. I got it right here. Let's see here. Gentleman Jim.
I'm I'm putting myself to shame here. But when you reach a
Here we
certain
go.
age, I'm doing
Yeah.
it's my Joe Biden
Raoul
impression.
Walsh. Raoul Walsh.
Raul Walsh. Yeah, pardon me, Raul. That's terrible. That's a terrible slip. People are not going to put no faith in me now. But Raul Walsh, yes, he was known for his fast-paced work, and it's just him, Flynn, and Raul Walsh, and Alexis Smith, and it's just a great film. So that's it. That's my favorite film. And it's no coincidence, or maybe it is a coincidence, but it's perhaps no accident that it was also Flynn's favorite film of his. I didn't just choose it because it's his favorite film, but it just happens to be my favorite film of his too.
Now that was the last, and I always consider that one of his last great films that he had, because right after that became that movie and They Died When They're with Their Boots On.
Oh, great film! I should have mentioned that. Yeah,
those two came out right at the time that his personal life was starting to unravel with the the rape case, the rape accusations.
Correct.
So, but those, I mean, the performance that he gave in those two films, I mean, I don't think he ever equaled that after that. I mean, he became hot. He became hot. He became hot, as they say. It was dangerous to touch him.
That's right. Yeah. Well, now I might redeem myself by mentioning the fact that Raul Walsh also directed They Died with Their Boots On. So, am I saved, Raul? Probably not with the viewing audience, but hopefully with you. Yeah. So those are two Raul Walsh films, great films, and he was probably at his peak in those films in terms of his looks and his acting ability and his verve and his panache. Because as you say, yes, in that very year when both those films came out, I believe 1942, the rape accusations were leveled, and basically from that point on, it was a pretty much steady downward grade for Mr. Flynn in all kinds of ways, career-wise, personally. So,
I can't help but think of, like, how do you think he would fare in today's culture?
He'd have been Me Too'd out of there his first time out of the gate. You crazy? A guy like Flynn, he'd be gone. No, he'd have no shot today. Out of there.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's like, but
it wouldn't be like a Harvey Weinstein thing, because Flynn didn't have to really do anything when it came to the women. That's his buddies were always ribbing him that, Flynn, you never made a woman in your life, because they were just throwing themselves on him. Yeah. And so, maybe give the guy a break. Maybe not for the rape accusations, which we may or may not go into here, but for all his wicked ways that he had with all those many young lovelies, at a certain point it was his downfall, because he had no willpower. The man could not resist. And so, yeah, one thing leads to the next, and you have a couple statutory rape charges against him, and then he gets together with as wife a teenager. He gets together with a teenager, marries her. Then toward the end of his life, they made a film out of it with Kevin Kline recently. He was dating a 15-year-old.
Beverly Adland. Yeah.
Beverly Adland, right. She was 15 when he died. She was 17 or 18. But he was just unabashed about it. He'd go to parties with her. They all knew her. This woman is under 18, and in California, where they usually were gallivanting about, under 18, that's statutory rape. If you're, having sex with a woman who's not at least 18. But he seemed not to care. I mean, he was very blithe about it, and it was Raul Walsh. We'll get Raul in here one more time for my slip earlier. It's Raul Walsh who said, at a certain point, he didn't want to live anymore. He didn't want to stop drinking. He was a vodka man, bottle a day man, at least. Mm-hmm. Not to mention all the other drugs he took, but we'll mention a few: morphine, cocaine, heroin came into play at some point. his wife, his second wife, Nora Flynn, writes about all this very eloquently in a great book. Some more great source material for Flynn aficionados out there. It's called Errol and Me by Nora Flynn, his second wife. Great stuff. And you might have seen in my own book, I take a lot of material from her. And yeah, right up there with the Earl Conrad book in my estimation in terms of source material for Errol Flynn.
Did you have any part that you found difficult to write about? Because, we've touched upon a great many foibles, for want of a better word. I don't want to say it's rape is a serious charge. Not trying to make light of that,
Oh, never.
but
Of course not.
yeah,
No,
but he had so many uh, faults. Did
indeed.
you find anything that you found hard to write about?
No, I didn't. I mean, I didn't know the man personally, and I have very, solid formal training as a historian. Um, I don't tend to get emotionally involved. I mean, I think I was and am a great fan of Flynn's, but I'm not a fanboy. You know what I mean? It's not like this is, oh my God, Errol, how could you have done such a thing? No, I knew what I was getting into. I knew the guy I was dealing with. That was part of the fascination, to be dead honest with you. The wicked side of him. That's what makes him perhaps, as interesting as he is. And no, I didn't find anything difficult to write about. If I had to say one thing, though, maybe his relationship to his mother.
Okay.
Which I hope doesn't reveal too much about me. But you forced it out of me, Jim. That wasn't hard either. But if I had to tell you one thing, yeah, the relationship with his mother. I mean, he called her. You read in the book, certain names that we'll leave unmentioned here.
Yeah, we lose our rating. Yeah.
Well, or I don't know. These days, maybe it's like a PG, but I'll refrain from mentioning the words. But just vulgar stuff. I mean, he hated his mother. He said it in so many words. He hated his mother. And why? Well, when she was a very strict disciplinarian, she beat him on a fairly regular basis, it seems, when he was a youngster. That's not going to endear you to your mother very much. And it's worth mentioning because that, in all likelihood, had a great impact on his relationship to women. I mean, Flynn also was known to raise his hand against the opposite sex on occasion. Namely, his first wife, Lily Demita. It seems that was the case, although she could give as good as she could get. He didn't call her Tiger Lil for nothing, okay?
Yes.
And then there was Nora, who writes about that in her book. So he wasn't... he wasn't at all averse to, disciplining, as it were, his own women, as he had been disciplined by his own mother. So that was an interesting one. It wasn't hard to write about, but it was kind of, it was hard to get into the mindset of how he could bring such hatred to his mother. I mean, it was very clear he hated her. But on the other hand, there are loving letters he writes to her. But you know how that is. You do what you can, I guess, but deep down you have certain other feelings you harbor. But that was probably the most gut-wrenching from an emotional standpoint that I wrote about. It's like, man, wow, that's brutal. No wonder you weren't that happy, Mr. Flynn.
Wow. Well, Kevin McAleer, thank you for being on the Junot Files. I really appreciate you doing this.
My pleasure.